Welcome back to the Recharge Zone podcast. This is your host, Brent Doty, joined with my co-host, Ann Margaret Gonzalez. Hi,
Hey.
Ann Margaret.
Hey, Brent.
And today we have a special podcast where just Ann Margaret and I are going to talk about some projects going on right now at the Field Research Park and other EAA-related happenings.
Mm-hmm. So Brent, can you give our listeners kind of like an overview of the evolution of the FRP? Kind of like since the inception when we acquired the land in 2019.
Yeah, definitely. And this is sort of foreshadowing an article we have coming out soon in the News Drop publication where we're going to be talking all about this. But y'all know we've had some guests on here before talking about this Field Research Park, the FRP we call it. And how we got it was through the city of San Antonio. So since the year 2000, City of San Antonio has had a program called the Edwards Aquifer Protection Program, EAPP, and we've talked about that in Season 1. But it's all about protecting the aquifer through acquiring conservation easements and properties outright over the Edwards Aquifer Recharge Zone and contributing zones. So in 2019, the city had an opportunity to buy a property outright on the Recharge Zone called the Parman Tract. And the Parman Tract was eventually purchased after it was geologically assessed and voted on by the Conservation Advisory Board. So the city acquired the property to protect the aquifer, and later that year they turned it over to the Edwards Aquifer Conservancy for research property. So to the EAA, the EAA's nonprofit EAC, Edwards Aquifer Conservancy. So from there, EAA took hold and started working on a research plan on how this property would fit in. Now, what's important to note here is that the FRP is right smack dab in the middle of the Cibolo Creek watershed. It's a very important watershed for the Edwards Aquifer. It contributes a lot of recharge. There's a lot going on there as far as geology and hydrology, so it's optimally located to conduct research. So kind of beginning in 2020, we started implementing different types of research out there, most notably land management. So we had Thomas and Matt on here earlier this season talking about how land management can be used as a conservation tool. And so they've installed different types of land management practices to see if you manage the land differently, can you enhance recharge through increasing soil health and soil thickness, from slowing down water and giving water more time to recharge. And so basically what we're doing out there right now is laying the foundations of developing a conceptual framework of how the science works and how we can actually quantify the possible benefits of these activities.
And so can you give our listeners, like, I know the berm and swale is one of the big things y'all do out there, and I've kind of seen the evolution of when the berm and swales didn't exist on the land, and then kind of what it's evolved into now. And like you mentioned earlier, Thomas and Matt were on and kind of talking about that. Can you just give a brief description of what the berm and swale is, and if someone was interested in doing something like that on a smaller scale at their house, is it effective, or like what can they do? What could they do?
Yeah, so to kind of visualize what a berm and swale is, think of a way to slow down water and capture water instead of having water just completely run off into the creek and down past the recharge zone. Imagine, if you will, shallow berms that sort of capture water during a rain event and hold it for a longer period of time. And we have a series of these at the FRP. In a kind of a mini watershed setting, a demonstration area, if you will. And so what they're effectively doing is slowing down water during an intense rain event and giving that water time to sink in. If those weren't there, that water would go straight into Cibolo Creek, and a vast majority of it would just flow right off the recharge zone without any chance of getting into the aquifer. So what we're suggesting here is that if you just slightly modified your landscape, you may actually increase your soil health. You may have greater soil saturation with water, and you may have more water infiltrate the aquifer, leading to perhaps prolonged spring flow on certain areas, maybe longer diffuse recharge. So that's the recharge that happens in between stream channels, the recharge that happens out in the open. So that's the key. That's what we're hoping to do there. But we need to prove that it works before we, have other people do it. Now, as far as doing it at your own house, the types of practices that we're working right now are kind of geared more towards ranches, but there are other practices that could be used at homes, like rain gardens, and other features that kind of hold the just storm water at your house.
Yes. And so it's the whole idea is to keep the water on the land longer so that it can kind of soak slowly into the soil, right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yes.
So I know when we actually had Matt on, we talked about the Saturo, and that instrument helps y'all research what's happening within these berms, right?
Yeah, it's an infiltrometer. So what it's looking at is, how saturated is the soil, and how does that change over time after a rain event. So it's important data to capture if you're looking at, well, how long does water stay in the soil after it rains, and is what we're doing out there making that last longer or not?
Yes. And so I know you all have a few things happening this month with some of the different things going on at the Field Research Park. And one of the things I got a chance to kind of see in action was y'all's LiDAR surveying, right? Can you explain a little bit about that?
Yeah, so this was a kind of a fun project we did last week. We had a volunteer, one of our staff members, is very close with a person at University of Texas who actually works with drones for remote sensing data. In this case, LiDAR, which is light imaging and detecting. And this individual volunteered to bring some equipment out to our site and fly a drone survey at the FRP to capture LiDAR data. Now, what's cool about LiDAR data is it allows you to sort of create a 3D landscape of your property and remove the vegetation in post-processing. So what you're seeing there is a map of the ground surface, every little feature, every little divot, karst feature, fracture, possible faults could be seen from this imagery. Wow. And we were able to fly the entire site. In addition to the LiDAR, we also captured really good photogrammetry, which we're going to build sort of a point cloud. So imagine like a 3D image that you can envelop yourself into is what we're doing out there.
Wow. So I believe it was a PhD student, right, from UT that was able to help us with that LiDAR surveying?
Yes, that's right. Her name is Marielle Nelson, and she is really a cool individual. It works over there at UT, and she volunteered to come out, and she brought with her two really unique drones. The first drone was kind of a less expensive, sort of faster drone that flew the path that we had planned for it in order to make sure that was going to work.
Yeah.
And then we flew a much larger drone that actually carried the LiDAR imager. So it's a pretty expensive piece of equipment that is just pointing a laser at the ground, recording data the whole time it's flying. So we essentially flew the entire site. It took most of the day, but the data that we captured is going to be really valuable moving forward.
Wow. And, you've heard about LiDAR kind of in the news lately with some of the things they're able to kind of find with that, what is it, below the canopies essentially, right? Seeing things.
Essentially, it can kind of see through the vegetation, and we have a lot of trees and brush out there, and you can remove most of that through post-processing. So you're seeing the actual ground across the entire site.
Wow. And so, so can you kind of explain what you all hope to gather with this LiDAR surveying?
So what we can do with it, if you take LiDAR over successive years, say we do it now, we do it 3 years from now, you can see changes like erosion or soil buildup. So if we're building a healthier and thicker soil layer around the demonstration area, the berm and soils, that will be visible in successive images of LiDAR. So you can do change detection over time using 2 sets of LiDAR. So that's one thing you can do with it. Another thing is just identify karst features that you didn't know existed.
Nice.
Because you didn't see them before.
Because they might be hidden or something, right?
Right.
Okay.
So you can do that with it. The photogrammetry will just allow us to make really, really crisp maps. So right now, the best satellite imagery resolution is about 30 centimeters. So every pixel represents 30 centimeters. Well, this is sub-centimeter resolution with drone footage. And then the LiDAR imagery was 2 centimeter, which that's also really, really good. Way better than you could get from a plane or a helicopter, at least out there.
Wow, that's fascinating. So, so kind of switching gears to something that you have coming up. I know you mentioned that you all have a project at the FRP where you're going to drill some boreholes and look at things.
So, yes, we have plans to do what's called hydrogeophysics at the FRP. And what that is using geophysics, the ability to, use tools to look beneath the ground without excavating the ground.
Okay.
In order to learn about what's happening beneath our site. So there's an important area in the aquifer that is between the ground surface and the water table of the aquifer, and we call that the vadose zone of the aquifer. So it's the part of the aquifer in between there that isn't saturated, but it's very important because water infiltrates through that area, water moves through there. So it's really good to know how much water is in there, potentially other elements like porosity or hydraulic conductivity, how fast the water can move and how many pore spaces there are. So what we want to do is use an instrument called an NMR, nuclear magnetic resonance. It doesn't use radiation or anything like that. What it does is have a strong magnetic signal to stimulate the protons and hydrogen atoms in water.
Okay.
So it's able to figure out how much water is in there very accurately. And that's how we're going to log, the changes in water over time at the site is through hydrogeophysics. So the point of these boreholes that we're drilling is to provide us access throughout the demonstration area and throughout the different parts of the site to see how their data compare, how much water is in each borehole and how much the pore spaces, how many pore spaces there are, and other aspects about the hydrology of the site.
Wow. So is this something kind of similar to what you were saying about the LiDAR where you will do this, every few years to kind of compare and contrast what's going on?
Yes, we need to log it for a long time. We need to log it during dry times like we're having now, as well as, wetter years, seasonal changes. So we need to log for quite some time.
Wow. That is so interesting.
We'll be out there drilling 11 different boreholes. And as part of that, we're also collecting drill cuttings and drill core. So they're actually, as they drill the boreholes, they're going to pull up these rock cores, which we're going to categorize and analyze.
Cool. So since the FRP is on the recharge zone, these boreholes, how deep will they be? Since you said it's between the water table and the Edwards Aquifer, right? The vadose zone?
Yes, we're going to make them, in this case, 30 feet deep. And the reason for that is we know that, the top layer is soil, and then it goes into this layer called the epikarst, which is where soil kind of starts turning into rock, and then into the karst region, which is all rock. So we want to go through all three of those layers, the soil, the epikarst, and into the actual Edwards limestone in many cases.
So you need some heavy machinery to get those.
Oh yeah, this is a legit drilling rig with, diamond tip bits on it to cut through the rock.
Wow.
So it should be a good time out there, and we hope to learn a lot, and we'll definitely report back on it.
Yeah.
And I think we will feature part of this in the upcoming news drop also.
Yeah, I like that. So so is that that caps off the year in a big way with what the FRP has happening. Do you have any insight for what 2023 will look like for research at the FRP?
Well, yeah, we actually have another couple of projects in the works. So right now we have 2 different water wells at the FRP and a couple of other water wells nearby that we're using to sort of, as I said, develop this conceptual model about how the aquifer works in that area. What we'd like to do is add a couple of more.
Cool.
So there's a nearby well that we're converting into a monitoring well. And we're actually trying to also drill a new monitoring well on the Edwards Aquifer on the FRP property itself. So we're trying to add a couple wells to that portfolio to help, sort of refine our understanding of water levels and the aquifers in that area, because we have both potentially Edwards and Trinity Aquifer water in that area.
Interesting.
So we're doing a lot out there. We got the boreholes going on. We do the drone survey. We're trying to add these 2 wells. So we're staying pretty busy.
Yeah, and then continuing to like full steam ahead with the berm and swell research and keeping that up, right?
Yeah, that's right. So I should mention that all of this is to help quantify the possible benefits of the land management. And in order to do that, we need to understand how much water is coming into the system, how much water is going out, either through evapotranspiration, which is, the plants absorbing the water, or it evaporating from sunlight, or running off into the creek, or infiltrating the ground. So when I say all these things, you need a lot of research and a lot of equipment in place to capture all these data. So yes, it is a pretty intense effort, and we hope to get some really valuable data that we can publish.
So would you almost say it's a new kind of horizon for research at the EAA and understanding the recharge zone like never before, since we have this dedicated research park?
I would say that it's pretty novel research, not only at the EAA, but there isn't a lot of research out there to quantify the benefits. There's a lot of anecdotal evidence where people have seen benefits. You can see springs flowing, that sort of thing. But to give hard numbers, it's difficult to do. And so there isn't a lot out there about it.
Wow. That's awesome.
Right?
I'm excited to see what happens and like what we learn.
Yeah, me too. It's certainly a multi-year effort, but we're off to a strong start, and we hope to continue that into 2023.
Nice. I'm excited to see what happens.
Me too.
So thanks for joining us on this episode of the Recharge Zone podcast. Have questions, ideas for topics, or things you would like to share with us? Well, reach out to us at rechargezone@edwardsaquifer.org.